other sessions, this recorded, and we will hopefully get these presentations uploaded on the website early next week. There is the chat option that all of you have access to, and you can drop their questions directed to members of the panel, and it would be great if you could use the queue so we can identify them as questions and be able to pick them up from there and have them discussed by our panelists. So I think I will give the floor to I'm just going to have a look at the program. I think Malin Henriksson is the first here on the list. Malin, if you could quickly introduce yourself and describe in a couple of minutes what your presentation is about.
Yes, thank you, Cosmin. Yeah, as you said, my name is Malin, and I'm a senior researcher at the Swedish National Road and Transport Research Institute, WTI, and together with my colleague, Mikaela Witt-Bryngard at the University of Copenhagen, but she's not here right now because she couldn't attend this hour because of caring responsibilities, actually. But we wanted to take the opportunity to present some results from the TINGO project. TINGO, which is an abbreviation for Transport Gender Observatory, is an EU-funded project where we analyze the transport sector and the growing smart mobility industry from a gender and diversity perspective. We also want to initiate some actual process of change. So if you want to look into the TINGO website, you can find a whole lot of resources there. But Mikaela and me have specifically focused on diversity in biking, since we have noticed that many bike sharing services do not support diversity in biking. But rather focus on a one-size-fits-all perspective, which excludes cyclists with diverse needs. And talking to stakeholders, municipalities, and so on, and they have emphasized how they know very little about groups that normally does not bike. In Scandinavia, such group is ethnic minority women. So we therefore decided as one part of our work to interview women that have attended bicycle courses for immigrant women arranged by the Red Cross. And in the video that we prepared for this session, that's called I Dreamed I Could Bike, Cycling as a Means to Freedom, we share some of the narratives on biking. We share some new narratives on biking compared to the general narrative or even discourse, you can say, in Scandinavia, which can be described as cycling is normal and good and everyone can bike. But our narratives rather shows that to start biking as an adult can also mean to have feelings of shame, insecurity, but also freedom, actually.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Malin. I'm giving the floor now to Amy Lubitow from Portland State University.
Hey everyone, it's bright and early here in Portland. Just woke up, so I hope to join for some other parts of your afternoon, which will be my morning. But yeah, my presentation was an extension of an earlier project. I'm really interested in barriers to bicycling for all different kinds of populations in Portland. And the specific study I did my presentation on was just on men of color bicycling in Portland. We're really interested. Sometimes it can be harder to interview men of color. And so we really had to kind of make this extra effort to get people to want to talk to us. So I had a research team of 3 different folks, and we did manage to do some interviews in person, online, over the phone or on Zoom. And so the findings of that research are really not surprising, I guess, in any sense, but men of all different ages reported a lot of racism, a lot of problematic language targeting them as they're using public cycling spaces. And then I think we also had some really interesting findings, unfortunate findings that I do think track with some of the national statistics on the rates of car and bicycling accidents, so where cars actually hit the bicyclists. I think, you know, obviously our study is a pretty small study with just 25 participants, but we are, you know, very concerned that there's such a high rate of conflict between cars and bikes for men of color. And I think overall, I'm really interested in kind of continuing to theorize around how these spaces that seem to be really impartial or seem to be not political spaces are in fact, you know, just a reflection of our larger kind of systemic inequalities. And so some of the same dynamics that you see in any other sector are going to show up obviously in our kind of public spaces. But I think oftentimes we tend to think about those as these sort of, you know, oh, they're perfect spaces, they're great spaces, they're out there for everybody to use. But in fact, you know, we're really finding that despite the fact that men of color that we talk to really, really want to be out there on their bikes, they really enjoy it. There are all these different kind of instances throughout the day that they're continually thinking about their race. They're continually thinking about who is watching them, who's potentially going to be interacting or engaging with them in negative ways. And so they're not necessarily having the same freedom of mobility that a person with you know, a different kind of racial privilege might have. So again, I'm really interested in continuing to think about mobility justice, to think about the kinds of ways in which we can both, I think, change some of the infrastructure, but also that this is a much larger question of, you know, making people feel like they're welcome, making people feel as though they're part of the city or the space that they live in, and kind of attending to some of the other kind of larger issues of racism and oppression that we see in the US and elsewhere. So yeah, that was what my presentation was about. I'd love to keep talking about that. And thanks, yes, good morning.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Amy. And it definitely is going to be an interesting conversation with all the presentations dealing with diversity issues. I'm going to give the floor now to Carol Kachadorian. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly.
You are. Thank you very much. So I have two videos that are part of this session. One I did with Trey Hahn, and the other I did on the 50+ cycling survey, and the other I did on ageism and cycling. So let me tell you, I'm assuming you've seen the videos. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I used to say at age 60, I began to consider what my professional and personal life would look like during the next 30+ years. My parents lived into their mid-90s. I'm now in my mid, and actually it's now in my late 60s, I'm working to improve mobility for people as they age. And at the, I was for a dozen years, I was a multimodal planner with a consulting firm. I developed an older adult mobility practice area, but due to COVID-19, I was laid off. So I just transferred my work to my own firm called Double Tilled Collaborative. And I also started a nonprofit so I could get funding for research, and that's called Double Tilled Core. I'm still learning how to do research, but I'm still passionate about older adult mobility and wellness. And actually last week, I learned a new concept. It's called salutogenesis, and I don't know if you folks know that term. It's understanding the factors that support human health and well-being. And it's from a how to stay healthy perspective rather than how to cure illness perspective. Quick story, I started the 50+ cycling survey because I met a woman while I was biking who was in her late 70s. She stopped, I stopped for a snack. She stopped to see if I needed help because she said she had tools that she could help me. Longer story short, we ended up cycling together for a bit. I learned a little bit about her and asked if I could talk with her again. She said yes, we scheduled a time to do that. And I made a list of questions to ask her. She was 79. She ended up canceling because she was going golfing instead. But I had this list of questions and I thought, I ought to do a survey. So that was 3.5 years ago. We are now in year 4 of the 50+ cycling survey, which Trey is in the, we talked about in the video that Trey and I did. So hopefully you watch that. If you watched my video on ageism and cycling, there was a little epilogue at the end. And if you saw that, I would be interested to know your reaction to that epilogue. That's it.
Thank you very much, Carol, for the introduction. Fascinating trajectory you have there. I think now I'll be introducing myself, basically, and the work me and Esther have been presenting. I am a researcher at Manchester Metropolitan University. I'm doing a postdoc focusing on working conditions amongst others, also the cyclists doing deliveries for various food platforms that we see nowadays in most of the cities in across the world, basically. Esther, on the other hand, has a very rich cycling experience, cycling research experience, focusing on inequalities and gender. Our research kind of picks up on these long-standing links between cycling and work, and most of the cycling that we know about and the cycling that's been researched indeed focus on cycle as work, cycle to work rather than cycle as work. There's literature in the 90s that discusses a lot of cycle messengers, but less so in relation to this new breed, which are the platform workers, the cyclists doing deliveries for platforms such as Deliveroo, Uber, Rappi in South America, Glovo across Europe, and so on. We have discovered this affinity between within cycling between cycling and gig work, and there's in relation to both of them this idea of flexibility. Cycling as a flexible tool, everybody can cycle supposedly. The solution to traffic congestions in cities is obviously cycling, because it's flexible. You can easily go from A to B. And on the other hand, this idea that gig work and this gig economy produces this flexibility of work. So there's this affinity that kind of captured our attention, and we decided to look into this, and with a specific focus on this multi-layered aspect of what precarity means. We have on the one hand the precarious nature of cycling itself, which is due to the fact that oftentimes being on the road as a cyclist makes you vulnerable in various instances, in various ways. At the same time, the work itself, the gig work, is nothing but flexible, as we have discovered in our research, is a precarious work. And adding to all of this, we have been focusing on gender and race/migrant statuses as elements which add an additional dimension to what precarity is. So I'm gonna hand over to Esther to tell you about what we have been discovering in our research.
Yes, thank you, Cosmin. That was already quite comprehensive for what we already show in our video. So for me, one of the main learnings as well was working with a decolonized approach to our research. So trying to pick up cases from different countries, not only in Europe, also trying to bring in research and researchers from some Latin American countries who had published maybe academic, but also maybe great literature of big value and good quality, so that we had data from those countries as well, and we could bring them in the discussion and acknowledge their efforts on capturing what is going on there as well. So for me, it was, for us, it was a good learning. This is part of an effort of integrating more widely the issues of decolonization in cycling research that, you know, is also part of the discussions in this symposium. And yeah, as Cosmin was saying, just very briefly, I was interested in bringing in the gender and the migrant perspective, for which we looked at data and we tried to also see what was going on. Very interestingly, women are very underrepresented in this gig economy work, but migrants are overrepresented in this work. So it was a practice of really looking into that and the levels of precarity that these conditions mean. And we were interpreting that from the perspective of intersectionality. So yeah, all of this in the mix.
Okay, thank you, Esther, for completing this introduction. Last but not least, we hear from Trey, who has worked in it together with Carol for the final of our presentation in this panel.
Hi, so I'm Trey. I'm with Bicycle User Experience and the Urban Cycling Institute, and my interests are in how different users experience cycling. And user is just a word, but I think this panel is really going to be really nice to be part of, and I feel very lucky to hear everyone's perspectives, because I think there are so many different types of people, vehicles, perspectives on cycling, and it's really something that's not looked into enough. So I think I wrote down something from the presentation of Malin and her colleague, that that people are so different and so are mobility needs, and that's something that we often forget in our designs and our planning. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Trey. So we have now about 40 minutes for discussions, Q&A session, and I see the chat is quite lively already. I'm encouraging you to drop questions there, and I will then give you the floor to address the questions to the speakers. I think we have one from Alejandro. Alejandro, if you want to formulate this question, I think it's for Amy.
Yes. And actually, it's something that I have been thinking ever since she started writing the paper. And to give context, so I'm a dual degree PhD student. Half of my PhD is in the United States, half is in France, but I'm in America. And I am deeply involved in the advocacy world, mostly in France. So I get to cycle in Latin America, I get to cycle in the United States, and I get to cycle in Europe. As a brown person with a Hispanic accent, this is me. And what I've realized, so for instance, here in France, I live in a suburb of Geneva on the French side of the border, but I'm no European citizen, which means that if the French administration delays my paper, I'm not supposed to leave the country. And I keep going cycling to the other side, like literally I cross the border every day, even when I'm paper, like, they could deport me, because I know that they will never stop me because they think I'm French. But this is a question of embodied experience, right? And I was thinking about how do we disentangle this experience and how do I behave? So for instance, in the United States, I do realize that I behave differently just because of the repressive sets of norms. Like I would not run on a red light in certain parts where I would expect the police to stop me, something that I do all the time in Europe or even in America. And so I was thinking about, and also, like running in Philadelphia, so my place in Philadelphia is in South Philly, which is working class white, and I'm running with my white friend, and you see like these MAGA people around, and they say hi to us when we run, but I don't look like a poor, like a brown dangerous person, I think. And so I've been thinking how do you disentangle this thing of race and class, and from whose perspective? Because there's a lot of work, very interesting work. So Amy's work, but other people like Arrested Mobilities by Charles Brown, the work of Dion Tolkien, so many like good people doing good work on these questions of mobility justice. But I don't think that the disentanglement of race and class is happening, and I'm not sure how you're able to do that. And I think that I am seeing this just because of the body that I inhabit and the perspective that comes with that. So that is the question.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Trey, if you want to pick up on this, and as Alejandro was saying, maybe the other panelists want to. Oh, sorry, it was for Amy. If the other panelists feel like
jump in there though, if you have some answers. You're welcome, Cosmin, to reflect on that if you want to. Or I can. Okay, I'll talk for a little bit, and then maybe we'll have a conversation. What do you want to do?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. And hi, Alejandro. It's nice to see you. And I feel like you're right. You asked me this question, I think, like way back. I think when I started this paper in 2019, and I think that you already answered it yourself, and that I don't think we can disentangle these things. I think, I have written this paper that I'm working on with my colleagues, and both of them identify as African-American men. And so I think we really, in writing this paper together, have really focused on that piece of identity because it's the most salient for people. It tends to be the thing that I think it's kind of a primary identity for people in the United States to be thinking about their race in that way, and kind of it's very visible for a lot of the people we talk to, and a lot of their reflections were about being recognized as being a person of color, whereas I think the class dynamics were very much part of what we found. We chose not to, in this presentation, I think in the paper, we didn't kind of bring it to the forefront, but there is kind of a constant, really fascinating current to all of the people that we spoke to about class. And so there were some kind of different class identities reflected in the participants we spoke with. Kind of a subset of people were like semi-professional cyclists. So, they're cycling 50 to 100 miles, at a time. They have multiple different kinds of bikes. They'll, on the weekends engage in recreational, like races. They have a very different class identity because they're thinking about equipment, they're thinking about riding gear. They're aware of the fact that they're able to access this certain kind of like competitive mobility that other people can't. But then at the same time, we talk to people who are like food delivery folks who are like, this is how I do my job. This is what I do. And biking for me is not fun. It's just what I do. And it's this kind of constant negotiation of being a person of color and then also being a person who's working as a bicyclist. So I think you can't ever really disentangle these things. I love qualitative research because I think it allows you to sort of be like, this is complicated. But, at least for my process right now, I'm really interested in sort of those visible markers. Like, yes, class is a little bit visible, right? You see that $2,000 bike, that person is a particular class versus, the delivery driver. But I'm still kind of, with you. I think one of the themes in everybody's paper was the intersectionality matters here, right? That if you're an older woman riding a bike, that's different than if you're an older man. And so for me, I think it's really not necessarily about always coming down to like the smallest piece of identity, but just trying to figure out where do you start to talk about and theorize about those intersections. And I think that's kind of what everybody was speaking about in their presentations as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on to that.
Yeah, I can add something. First, I can say that our research with immigrant women who live in low-income areas, of course, that they do live, all of them that we interviewed, in low-income areas, and they are working in low-skilled work or are unemployed. Of course, that matters so much in relation if they can take up cycling and in what way. For instance, there are a lot of problems with bicycles thefts and vandalism in these low-income areas, which means that if you invest in a expensive bike, you actually might risk losing it maybe the next day even, because there are not a lot of infrastructure that protects bikes in that way, parking spaces and so forth. And so that is an issue. And if you can't have a good bike because you don't have the money to buy it or can't keep it safe, then it's more difficult to start biking because you need a good bike to do that. So that's, of course, one very important aspect here. And secondly, also, Amy, I recognized some things from your paper in relation to our interviews too. I don't think that, as I said, we interviewed women, and they didn't talk about verbal abuse, but some talked about how they get like comments on how they ride their bikes. For instance, a woman that we interviewed had her kids in a bicycle cart and they didn't have helmets on them. And someone said, you should have helmets on your kids. And she said she actually have, done her research. And in Sweden, we do have a law that says that you have to have helmets on kids under the age of 15, but not in bicycle carts. So she knew that she didn't need helmets for them and had done, a choice there. But that kind of comments, it's not everyone that gets them. It's a specific kind of people that are open for such, educative, or if you can say, comments. So I recognize that.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I think me and Esther, we can also reflect to an extent on these issues of intersectionality. For example, with regards to migrants, I think we have come across some very interesting and worrying trends at the same time. On the one hand, I think that the question of class is very important here, because these workers didn't get a lot of public and media attention more generally up until the COVID pandemic kicked in, and then a lot of normal middle-class Englishmen ended up doing deliveries, and this created all of a sudden a media outrage. How is this possible? While at the same time, migrant workers were doing this kind of job for years without much media attention and without a lot of looking into these issues. And I could see at least this happening much more visibly with the beginning of the pandemic. On the other hand, with regards to migrant status, I think there was this discussion that we see a lot with regards to reclassifying these workers to become not self-employed but employees, and this kind of initiative that you see in the public space, that this is how we would solve the problem. They kind of miss the point sometimes, because many of these workers with migrant status, they don't have the right papers to be in the UK, for example, and that creates a problem for them of not being legal, and just reclassifying them wouldn't necessarily solve the situation. And I think Esther can say similar things with regards to women doing deliveries.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very good question. For me, like, I wonder how to take this practically into the research and even into policy making. It's like we have these different levels of intersectional discrimination. This leads to precarity, but also different levels of precarity. So there are some people who are more discriminated than others, to the extent that they can become invisible. We discussed this invisibility for specific migrant workers that don't have access to the legal system, the health system, and they don't want to speak up because they are afraid of being deported, for example. So they become really invisible. And there are levels of invisibility, of discrimination, of precarity. And I think the reasons for that, we don't want to assume the reasons for this. It's not only class, it's not only ethnicity, it's not only gender. There might be things intertwined in this. And also in order to take it practical, like, okay, how do we then provide access to cycling to these groups of people, these communities? How do we do it? And I think it's a matter of really, as Amy was saying, is very, I think, qualitative at this point, to really dig out what is going on with these people, why they are invisible, why they don't have access. And sometimes this will go beyond just the cycling thing, just the cycling practice. It will go towards systemic issues of discrimination, legal issues. We might need to start looking at the bigger picture. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Esther. I was wondering if anyone wants to add something to what has been said already. Otherwise, there's, as usual, lively discussions in the chat area. And I might give the floor to Peter Cox again, who's addressing a question to Amy here and probably to the rest of us.
Although I think that Esther's actually just answered the point I kind of wanted to raise, so I'll shut up.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Fair enough. I think, yes, we have Alejandro who's making probably a comment rather than a question, but feel free to voice this one. Alejandro, please. I think you're muted.
I am. Okay.
Yes.
Good. Now I can talk. All right. So I've been thinking. So this is another thing, and it's also linked to what Paola and other people were saying in the previous session, because I really think that something is political, And when people say that it's not political, it's just that they live in a world of hegemony, whatever hegemony, like the Netherlands and just like in policies. But what I was thinking is that it's also a play, a game, like, if some people cycle because they have to, not because they want to, and it might be that, this is also the case of delivery workers. This is what they have to do. This is what they can make money. But those people that cycle because they want to, I have this impression that they play with their identities to forward or background, whatever element is conducive to put forward the political that they want to make. So this is also linked to this idea of who gets, like, this Candace Subaltern speak, who is really talking about bicycle policies, and those people are really big. Are they talking? Can we listen to them? Are there ways that we can engage with them? Saying, okay, so I don't know. So if I talk about my experience, I am a migrant, I am a Hispanic, and I am a poor PhD student. But on the other hand, I have this elite education, and I speak 3 languages, and I have like these networks of people. So I can play with that. That gives me a certain legitimacy in certain spaces. Like if I want to participate with people with mobility justice in the United States, or citing people in Europe that want to talk infrastructure. But I'm playing with my identities, and I'm backgrounding or foregrounding whatever thing, whatever aspect is conducive to my political engagement. So I just want the panelists to reflect on that from their own perspectives, and I don't know, maybe learn something about it.
Anyone has something to add to this?
I'm happy to add some thoughts. What occurs to me is, as a multimodal transportation planner, is how do we change the way we do our work so that we're more inclusive, not only in the engagement for doing master planning or corridor planning, but that planning reflects, or the outcome of that reflects what is needed. In listening to some of the videos, what struck me was, and reading some other things, what struck me is connections, capacity are issues. And I'm stuck on this thought of, in the United States, we talk about induced demand, so that if you build more motor vehicle travel lanes, you now have induced demand for motor vehicles, which is a bad thing, and I don't disagree with that. But we don't turn that term on its head and say, if you build a wider trail, or if you build more separated bike facilities, or more separated intersections, or add more bicycle signals, that creates induced demand for more people of different backgrounds and needs cycling. So take that concept and sort of, how do we as multimodal planners do a better job? I know that we tend not to include older adults, or in the United States, there's such a focus on people of color and lower income people that older adults tend to be an also ran. And I don't think it needs to be one or the other. So anyway, I throw that out there.
Thank you, Carol. I'm just having a look here at the chat. I think I would ask Paola to add to the conversation here.
Hi, Cosmin.
Hello.
Hold on, let me just turn on my camera. So I had read your chapter with Esther beforehand, and I really enjoyed it because I think it's such an important topic that we should be discussing. And I put in the chat that I'm very intrigued by how much we can unpack from these processes when we adopt like a multi-scalar mobility justice perspective. Because obviously you have these migrant workers already, and then you mentioned this in RGS, right? That these are people who have, these mobile lives, and then they become inserted into these like circuits of capital and precarious labor in mobile ways. And it's just really interesting to me. And I wanted to ask if you have any perspectives on how we can think from a value creation perspective about the mobility injustice at play, right? And then there was a second reflection I wanted to make, but I forgot it now. But that's principally the thing that I've been thinking about with regards to these gig workers, the question of value creation on the move, right? From these precarious bodies and what it entails to produce value in this way, right? Because it's always such an embodied and corporal process. But here, I don't know, it's just so troubling. And there is, oh, I remember now. The other thing I wanted to ask is, this is something that I've discussed with many people, including some of the people here in the chat. And it has to do with the idea that, right, we have this idea, this vision of the bicycle as this emancipatory vehicle that brings liberation and it's so enjoyable. But what do we do when the bicycle is absorbed by neoliberalism? You know, so those are my questions.
Very, very challenging ones, actually, and I'm happy to give it a go, and maybe Esther wants to add to the discussion. I think we are seeing something here which is very similar to what happens in terms of transport planning, where where we can see a lot of uniformization of cycling experience when we are building infrastructures. I think this is similarly happening with these platforms, which are very much into presenting these kind of jobs as something that's accessible and easy, and it's for everyone, and the work is flexible, and it is anything but that. So I think this question of value creation is very cunningly hidden, actually, from view, because oftentimes these platforms are saying, well, no, you're just exploring the city and you're earning some money in the process. They almost present it like a playful thing to do. And I think the bicycle here runs the risk of getting into these narratives where we're not taking it for serious. You're just having a good time and you're earning some money in the process. So I think that's something that I can say in relation to this platform, which are very good at reclassifying work on the one hand as gig work, not as paid work, as employees that these people should be, and also the work itself. It's a gamification there. You're just earning points. You're just kind of going for a play each time you're there doing the actual work. So I think capturing this value creation, I think it's difficult to do within such a narrative, and this is why we need to discuss what is work when it comes to doing this kind of jobs, because these riders, these couriers, are being paid per delivery. They are not being paid per hour, and they spend half of their time just deciding and doing these calculations, which order is worth taking, which order should I reject, where I should go in order to get a better order than I'm currently doing, where I'm not getting any. So I think the question of what work is, I think, is very important in this particular context of cycle couriers.
Yeah, sorry, just to finish with that, we really need more Marxist perspectives on gig work.
No, I think adding to that, I think it's very important to lift out these resistance movements that actually are people that are working in cooperatives and things like that you raised in your presentation, Kasmin and Esther, and to actually see that there are other ways of organizing work, and that biking and deliverance by bike can be, you know, a very I don't know what word to use, but good work to have if you actually have the power to set it up as you like, rather in the gig economy perspective. And I also wanted to add that we have, in relation to this, we have a very interesting situation in where I live, in Linköping in Sweden, where we have electric bike sharing service, very good bikes that are easy to use and they are fast and things like that. And it's about a year old, this system, and it's set up by a public actor. So it's a publicly run bike sharing system. And when it was launched, the one thing that was very obvious was that bike couriers started using it. So the most common user were bike couriers, and we actually interviewed some of these bike couriers to understand how they used it in their work and why and so forth. And it was very obvious for us that for them it was a way to improve their work conditions, because they could actually make more deliveries per hour using these bikes instead of their own bikes, that were very, slow and things like that. So for them it was a very positive thing. But the municipality saw that first they didn't want to be associated with the gig work. So they thought like, okay, we don't want to make it look like that we have supported this kind of, working conditions that is connected to gig work right now. And secondly, people were annoyed that the bike couriers used this system, whereas they thought that it was for the inhabitants or the citizens, where the bike couriers weren't included. So those processes is kind of interesting to see what happened when we put out this new innovation that is also part of like smart mobility and things like that, and they intersect with the bike couriers. So there was something related to neoliberalism, maybe, and how, yeah.
I was just going to add on that I think that there's someone, Claudio, in the comments also kind of brought up this idea of like the tech industry. And I was just thinking about how some of these, mobile apps, or even, having to put a credit card in order to use a bike share bike. There's all these kinds of different ways. You've got like that conflict of like, a person who has, we say undocumented in the US, but, that kind of, migrant status and that additional surveillance piece that technology brings into this, I think is really a fascinating place there that maybe, underexplored, but there's some potential there. So I think if we're asking these kinds of larger questions about like, what does it mean once we have all of these technologies and different people moving around, and then these different resources that are available, what happens once we're able to surveil that a little more deeply? I think it's a little worrisome in some instances, depending on what you're using. So.
Thank you very much for this. I feel like we are kind of getting the discussion towards platform capitalism and probably less cycling. And I think I would like to hear from Angela, who's had her hand raised for some time now. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Cosmin and everyone. Nice to see you all. Yeah, it's a fascinating mix of presentations, and of course, I'm really happy to. I was happy to watch the presentation from Malin Henriksen about the migrant women and the learning to bike, because I'm quite passionate about that topic. And a little back, the conversation was about visibility. And I really like that in relation also to that topic, because my intuition is that is a key first step of starting to talk about things and starting to understand things. And I was wondering if Malin could elaborate a bit more on, okay, the bike lessons and migrant women getting access to bikes. Oftentimes from my experience, it's oftentimes very much focused on, if I frame it negatively, like fixing women so they fit the current system of cycling. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on what can be done, like what can practically be done to fix the system more, so that a more diverse group of people can have access to the cycling system in countries like where I'm from, the Netherlands, our country, or the Nordic countries where you did your research.
Mm. Well, thank you, Angela. That's a really good question. First, regarding this notion of let's fix this women, I think that's there's a very double way of looking at it, because on the one hand, the courses that we have investigated or talked to people that are engaged in these courses, they are there. It's based on NGO work, where actually a lot of people feel that finally it's something that actually helped me in my everyday life, and they also express, these women, that it actually helps them to, like, okay, I am more free now, I don't need to go by bus anymore, or I don't need to have my husband driving me around in the car. So it's very, a lot of stories about achieving freedom in relation to mobility. And then the other hand is that they're like facing a norm in Scandinavia and in the Northern Europe, where you should bike. And I think it was one of the women that I interviewed said, like, in Sweden everyone drinks water and everyone bikes. And I thought that was such a good example of how she felt a pressure of adopting to a certain norm that maybe she felt very excluded from. So that's really a lot of different things at stake here. But regarding your other question about how can we improve, or how can we work with this? I've been thinking a lot about when you learn to bike, because in Sweden, at least, I mean, the children learn to bike by their parents and not in schools. When you start school, you already, people think that you already should be a biker by then, even though you can't bike to school until 9 or 10 or whatever in Sweden anyway. But it's not something that everyone thinks that you can bike. So I think that actually having bike programs in schools would do a lot to improve the biking as something for everyone, and not pinpointing a specific groups as not being able or knowledgeable bikers. So that's one thing. But I think also having access to different kind of bikes more easily than it is now is also so important, because if you're not an able or experienced bicyclist, not all bikes are that easy to start adopting. And tri bikes for adults, for example, these are quite not that common that we see that. And I think to start using them is kind of a stigma, I think. So, but just, to actually rethink how we design bike sharing systems so that we can have different kind of bikes in them could actually also be a way of giving access to different kind of cyclists, and maybe normalize that we do have different bikes needs. That was some kind of answers maybe.
I know others have their hand up, but I did some work a couple of years ago on adaptive bike share systems in the US. And there are 4 different models, and it depends upon how you define adaptive. I think many of the bike share companies viewed e-bikes as an adaptive bike, but there are trikes, as you know, there are tandems that are buddy bikes, so somebody who has a disability. And the real question is, in the US, what bikes do you choose to put in a bike share station, or have them be a dockless system? And the common solution is to put them in a bike shop or in a single location and require the person with the disability, who may not drive, who may find it difficult, but require them to travel to that location to get the bike. So how do they get there? And how long can they keep the bike? And my sort of thinking is, why not have grants to buy adaptive bikes for people so the bike fits the person instead of trying, back to Angela's point about making people adapt to the system rather than adapting the system to people who need to use it. So I do think that adaptive bike share, maybe we haven't found the right solution. We also, a couple of years ago, adapted some bike education materials for the city of Boston to include adaptive bikes for kids in schools so that they understood maybe you needed to adapt the layout for a bike rodeo or include other bicycles and, move forward like that. Amy, Portland has an adaptive bike share education system in their schools as well, which is really a good model. So anyway, it's a good question. I'm done.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you both, Angela and Malin. I'm aware there are a couple of other raised hands here. Esther wanted to make a point and then maybe help me out with the order of the hands being raised.
Yeah, it was just a quick point from the previous conversation. And then I think Trey has been raising his hand for a long time. And I just wanted to make the point of the language. We were speaking about the bike messengers, the gig workers, and I think there's a lot about language and how language is used or misused with these flexibility concepts and calling them partners instead of workers, because then you don't have to respect their rights as workers, and all these different names and languages that are used by the companies to to use the company for their interests and exploit people. And how it's curious that in these resistance strategies, the first thing people do is to change the language. And by language, I also include the algorithms. So they create their own algorithms, their own apps, so that the language that is embedded there is making the right decisions for them, or the decisions at least that are more visible for them, because otherwise they become invisible and they're punished by the algorithm without really knowing what they have done wrong, and they're kicked out and the system and things like that. So I think language is a good way of kind of try to tackle or analyze how this is used against the workers, how these systems of oppression are used against them. Yeah, it was just my point on language. Thanks.
Thank you, Esther. Trey, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. My comments on a bit of a different subject. It was a question of Peter to Carol. And his question was rephrased to, how do we change road spaces to facilitate, not inhibit active mobility? Yeah, I think it's general and it's something we're all thinking about, and it's very important. But I think this panel is one step to being, it's something that's an important step to addressing this. First, recognizing there are different perspectives and different experiences that people have while cycling. So how do we move to change road spaces? I think a starting place would be to start looking more from the perspective of the different users. And there are so many different types, and we talked about the intersectionality. Someone that's older will have one perspective, someone that's older with a disability will have a perspective, a younger kid, a migrant kid. There's so many different things, and we maybe implicitly have our own more condensed beliefs about what we see. But when we hear other people's perspectives, we see there's so much more.
Okay, thank you, Trey. And I think we have another one raised by Einar. Unmute.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, it's so that, because the thing is what I get with this whole panel is also the whole time, you lack vision. You're afraid to express yourself. You have to go full on, because what it is, what I gather here is you're also fragmentizing all those topics. But if you go out there and say what you want, then you will get somewhere, and someone maybe share your vision because you're only pointing out certain things and what highlighting them. So if I'm going to start up, we're going to build this year, for example, a startup where I'm going to build cargo bikes and cargo trailers. And my company is called Cycolution. So in that moment, but I'm depending on money. Where do I get that from to have it? So, and I in that moment need whereas early on spoken about Marxist approach, but I need stakeholders, and that would be municipalities, landlords, housing associations, and God knows who know what else, like hoteliers and who else, just to get it all in there that people are interested. So in that moment, you're employing lots of people, you've got various stakeholders, and you have to cater for everyone. So but you give it also a vision. Everyone is participating in that moment. Not everyone, but it's so in that moment you have to go that way. You have to bring it full on, and then you will see what works and what not. And it's here. I live where I live. I live in Herefordshire in the UK, and that is ethnically it's mainly white. You could say 80% is white, and it's getting a little more. But so we don't have that. Yes, we don't have that kind of. We have racism here, but we don't see much of it. So. We are rural areas, and we have problems there also connecting with another. But I just see this the whole time in every panel where I take part there's also the word, like in Sweden, there was something, but someone tried something, was called project fatigue, where everyone has been doing something the whole time, and eventually the people just dried up. They just didn't want to participate anymore. So I think you really have to bring out your vision, what you want, and see how the people react to it, and say, not only saying, oh, you will find someone will get a hold of you there and have more interest in you. So that's me. I don't want to criticize you, but I think you have to be more bold and just go out there and see what you want. So that's it. Sorry for this.
No, thank you very much, Einar, actually. And I believe, and we believe, that Cycling and Society Symposium across the years has been managing together these critical voices that are doing cycling research. And I think we've been doing this for some time. And yeah, I think all of us are frustrated with cycling still not being where we would want it to be. But I think this is a space that has been constantly critical. And
yeah, but the thing is, like early on you said something like someone mentioned early on that the neoliberals were taking over. If you look at it, how much data they want to collect, just the data where you use the bike, all those cycling, those rent bikes you can get in every corner around wherever you go to, they're collecting data, and they're having that data will influence decision made by the municipalities. That is. And they can sell it, that data. And so there you're on the back foot again. So you really have to go out there and be bold and brave and knock on the doors and say, look, that's what you want to go along, and see who joins. You see that? It's that data collection, because whenever you go to discussions, it's always, oh, where do we have the data? Where we get that? The data is good, but at the end of the day, someone owns that data, and you have to buy it, don't you? And that's where those neoliberals, those big companies who do rent out bikes, they will gain advantages there. So it is. I see this here now at our council. That everything is based on data, where they can build the infrastructure for, and that's the problem. Who owns that data?
Thank you very much, Einar. I think this is a capitalist realism that we're getting into, and I think we can take this forward in our social event that should take place in about half an hour. I think we are drawing to a close here for this session, and hopefully with more upbeat discussions we're going to be having during our social event. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions. I think it's been a great discussion, and looking forward to meeting you in half an hour, Esther? Okay, in our socials, and we can debate this, because it's a never-ending story how we can think outside this capitalism realism.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.